On News X World, we'll start with some breaking news coming in at top of the hour. Now we have news from Canada, where a tragic shooting has left 10 people dead in Tumbler Ridge, British Columbia. According to the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, authorities are saying that 6 victims were found inside a local high school, while one person died en route to the hospital. The suspected shooter was also found dead, police confirmed. And in a related development, 2 more people were discovered dead at a nearby residence believed to be connected to the attack. Around 25 others were injured, though officials say their injuries are not life-threatening. Schools in the area were placed under lockdown as investigations continue. And while we continue to track developments from Canada, we have some more news, breaking news coming in as far as the India-US trade deal is concerned. We're now picking up that the United States has revised its fact sheet on the historic trade deal with India, removing references to pulses and changing key purchase commitments. The White House's updated fact sheet now states that India intends to purchase over $500 billion worth of US products, replacing the earlier wording which said India was committed to making this purchase. The updated text also omits India's removal of digital services taxes, which was part of the initial deal. The agreement, reached after nearly a year of negotiations, includes significant tariff reductions for Indian exports. Joining me now on this discussion is Andrew K.P. Leong, who is a China strategist and joins us from Hong Kong. Mr. Leong, thanks very much for joining us here at News X World. Firstly, how do you see the fact that the US has gone to inconspicuously make these changes? No announcement made, no conversation done.
Well, this represents another recalibration of President Trump's maximum coercion, maximum demand, and then depending on the response and usefulness of the other side, recalibrating its final deal. After all, well, by the way, that's known as tackle. Trump always chickens out to various degrees because Trump's increasing use of his coercive tactics is a kind of maximized negotiation strategy. Now, as far as the India is concerned, this must fit into the overall calculation. While the National Strategic Strategy released a couple of weeks ago reveals that the United States is pivoting towards the Western Hemisphere, it doesn't mean that the United States is forgetting about the Asia Pacific. On the Asia Pacific, the United States continues to set great store on its allies, within quotation marks, to various degrees, including India, and also include particularly Japan, South Korea, exemplified by the and also by the Americans' defense treaties with South Korea, including stationing of over 20,000 American troops there, but also Japan forming a closer military partnership with South Korea, but also India, particularly the so-called Indo-Pacific strategy to contain China. And as far as Australia is concerned, of course, is the AUKUS, Australian-UK nuclear submarine deal. So this is part of Americans' offshore balancing. But as far as India is concerned, the Trump administration doesn't want to antagonize India too much, because India still remains to be very useful in this offshore balancing to safeguard Americans' interests in the Asia Pacific.
Do you think this really, the changes that have happened is due to pressure from New Delhi, because India is very sensitive about its farm sector?
Well, of course, India, of course, wants to safeguard its multidimensional, multi-polar approach. Doesn't want to be tied directly to one bloc or another. Don't forget that India still wants to maintain good relations with Russia, still buying a certain amount of Russian oil, and of course, is recalibrating relationship with even with China, despite the continuing rivalry and confrontation over long-standing border disputes. So it speaks to a more multidimensional, multifaceted, more flexible, more transactional, if you like, kind of foreign policy that characterize many other countries, including India, but also including the European Union and other countries in the global south. Because the whole world order, the world order established after the Second World War, has now been totally dismounted. No longer you can follow the traditional norms because the Trump is hell bent on is make America great again, using Americans' dominance in military, finance, the dollar, to exact maximum gains for itself, even though threatening other countries' sovereignty, as a case of Greenland and also even Canada, but to also a large extent India imposing 500% tariffs. But then, as I said, this is a maximized negotiating tactic, which translates into a more transactional outcome at the end. Sometimes a term as a taco. Trump always chicken out, but it really boils down to how useful is the other party and how strong is the other party to defend its own self-interests.
Right. Also weigh in the fact, Mr. Leon, here that along with India, US is also striking deals with its neighbors, Pakistan and Bangladesh. And Bangladesh, which is headed for election, Pakistan, which has just joined the Board of Peace and has Trump's crypto interests there. How is the US really trying to leverage these deals with South Asian countries?
Well, this also speaks to the Trump administration's disbelief in the so-called traditional allies or blocs, and it forms even closer partnership to its allies' enemies, as in the case of Pakistan vis-a-vis India. And in fact, earlier on, the Pakistan, one of the top generals was invited to visit the White House. And also brokering deals. This also reinforces the narrative that the Trump administration is very transactional and bent on maximizing its own self-interest, regardless of the so-called traditional allies or the enemies of its allies. So anything, all this don't matter in face of what the Trump administration top agenda to make America great again, regardless, using maximizing its coercive power to extract the greatest gain. And of course, Pakistan is also useful in the Middle East corridor, the Middle East theater, and so it doesn't matter. Even Pakistan is an traditional enemy of India, but it's still being used as one of the pawns. So this comes back to my earlier explanation that we are now facing a more multiplex world where traditional allies and blocs don't count anymore, and each country has to put great store on its own self-reliance and self-strength, but also recalibrating its relationships in all quarters.
Mr. Leong, thanks very much then for joining us. Viewers, we're now moving. There's some more breaking news details coming in. Now, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has arrived in Washington, D.C. for a high-level meeting with U.S. officials amid escalating tension in the Middle East. The visit comes at a critical moment with discussions expected to focus on the ongoing war in Gaza, efforts to secure hostage releases, regional security concerns, and the growing threat posed by Iran. Netanyahu's trip underscores the strategic alliance between the US and Israel as diplomatic efforts intensify. Officials say the talks aim at addressing both immediate security challenges and broader regional stability. More details are expected following his meetings in the US capital. Matthew Wadham, American journalist and author from Washington, D.C., joins me in this conversation. Matthew, how do you view this sudden visit of Netanyahu? What are the key issues that are likely to be discussed?
I think this is about the fifth or sixth visit that Prime Minister Netanyahu has paid to President Trump in his second term. I think it's pretty clearly related to the buildup of U.S. forces around in the waters of Iran, with a possible view to attacking Iran to force the regime of the mullahs, the theocratic totalitarians, out. So I think that this must be related to the military issues surrounding Iran and the United States and Israel, which will, no matter how you slice it, Israel is going to be involved in this, whatever happens in Iran.
Right. How do you see progress as far as dialogue with Iran is concerned?
I don't think they've made much progress at all. Iran wants to enrich uranium to build nuclear bombs, and the United States is saying no, you can't do that. And I think that's a major sticking point. The U.S. is pressing Iran to stop killing its own people for protesting in the streets, and Iran may say that it's going to do that, but no rational person believes them. They've killed 30,000 people or so since in recent months, since the various protests and uprisings began against Iran. So there's a number of issues. Can President Trump, master world-class deal maker that he fancies himself to be, use his silver tongue or wave a big stick at Iran and get them to suddenly agree to dismantle their nuclear weapons program? I very much doubt it, and I suspect that the talks are only happening with Iran as
either we reach a deal or the US will do something tough. That's what the president is saying. What is it that Trump is threatening Iran with?
Well, Trump has got a vast armada assembled in the waters near Iran, and he is threatening. If he's not saying it explicitly, he is at least implicitly threatening regime change. He's tired of Iran being the world's leading state sponsor of terrorism, and his approach to dealing with Iran is very different from that of his predecessor, President Joe Biden. And Iran is going to have to come to some kind of an arrangement with President Trump, or the regime is going to be forced out. This is the way I see it.
All right. Matthew, thanks for your opinion. Stay on with me. Viewers, moving ahead now, French prosecutors have disclosed disturbing details in a wide-ranging international abuse case involving a 79-year-old former educator charged with aggravated rape and sexual assault against 89 minors over more than 5 decades. The alleged crimes are said to have taken place between 1967 and 2022 across Europe, Africa, Asia, and Latin America, including Germany, Switzerland, Morocco, Niger, Algeria, the Philippines, India, Colombia, and France's overseas territory of New Caledonia. In an unusual move, authorities publicly identified the suspect as Jacques Levuc, Gül, who's born in Annecy in 1946. He's remained in custody since his indictment in 2024. Investigators say the case came to light after a USB drive was discovered by a family member. The device reportedly contained 15 volumes of personal writings in which the suspect allegedly described sexual abuse involving minors aged 13 to 17. The investigation also uncovered confessions by the suspect to 2 earlier killings involving close relatives decades ago. Authorities are now urging any additional victims or witnesses to come forward as the investigation continues into what is being described as an exceptional and deeply disturbing case. Let's first listen into the statements from the chief prosecutor.
Mémoire. Et en février 2024, Monsieur Leveugle a été interpellé, placé en garde à vue, a admis à cette occasion que ses mémoires était, je l'ai dit, l'expression de la réalité. Il a été mis en examen, donc, sous les qualifications d'agression sexuelle et de viol aggravé par la minorité de moins de 15 ans de certains des mineurs, et agression sexuelle également sur mineurs de moins de 15 ans. Il a donc parcouru ces différents pays, et dans chacun de ces lieux où il va s'installer pour faire du soutien scolaire, être enseignant, il va rencontrer des jeunes et il va avoir des relations sexuelles avec ces jeunes. C'est en tout cas ce qu'il consigne dans ses mémoires. Ce qui va d'ailleurs, la brigade de Visil va donc s'emparer de ces fichiers numériques, ouvrir une enquête et va investiguer. Travail très long puisque c'est divisé en tomes. Il y a 15 tomes. C'est vraiment une matière très, très dense, et les enquêteurs vont devoir lire la totalité de ces écrits et vont recenser 89 mineurs, l'évocation de 89 mineurs. Les premiers faits remontent à 1967, les derniers faits remontent à 2022. Il s'agit essentiellement d'évocations de rapports sexuels avec des mineurs de 13 à 17 ans.
And now moving on, the US and Azerbaijan have signed a strategic partnership agreement in Baku, marking a new chapter in economic and security cooperation. US Vice President J.D. Vance and Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev highlighted their country's commitment to enhancing defense ties, energy security, artificial intelligence and counterterrorism. The deal, which builds on earlier talks between Aliyev and US President Trump, also aims to strengthen peace efforts in the South Caucasus. Vance's visit to Armenia, which included a deal for a potential US-backed nuclear power plant, further signals Washington's growing influence in the region. Let's listen in to what the leaders had to say.
Today, relations between the United States and Azerbaijan are entering absolutely new phase. In the charter which we signed with our dear guest, there are different directions of our cooperation. We will continue to work closely on the issues related to security, anti-terror operations. We will continue to work on the issues related to energy security. Azerbaijan today provides energy security with its natural gas resources to 16 countries. 11 of them are NATO members, the allies of the United States.
There's a lot to announce. We could spend, I think, all day up here talking about some of the great things that are happening. We're going to ship some new boats to Azerbaijan to help you all with some of your territorial waters protection. We're proud to announce, and I believe I was one of the very first to fly along the new Trump Road for international peace and prosperity that will connect the two separate parts of Azerbaijan. And our hope is that that will build the kind of economic and natural resource and critical mineral cooperation that'll make it possible to really make this incredible peace agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia.
All right, let's welcome back Andrew K.P. Leong, China strategist from Hong Kong in this discussion. Andrew, very quickly, Trump has gone on a couple of times to say how he's brokered a peace deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and now he's dealing with both countries and having influence and showing greater interests in the South Caucasus. How do you view that, and how much US influence is going to affect the region?
The Trump administration's pivot now to Azerbaijan and Central Asia must be read in terms of two main dynamics. First of all, is resources. Secondly, offshore balancing. On the first one, resources, of course, the Azerbaijan sits very close to the central landlocked nations, very rich in minerals, very rich in other resources, including energy, fossil fuels. And secondly, it is right at the conduit which is known as the middle corridor, bypassing the kind of conduit passing through Russia. So the middle corridor connects Central Asia and Azerbaijan, and then as well as the Caucasus, including the Caspian Sea, with through rails and other transport routes, including pipelines to China. And China, of course, increasingly relied on the middle corridor. And even a couple of months ago, or even earlier, the United States was also, the Trump administration also, through its commercial proxy, the BlackRock Corporation, taking the interest in the middle corridor. So all this dynamics translates into the two main strategies which I mentioned earlier. Firstly, resources. Secondly, as a kind of offshore balancing against the influence of China.
Mr. Leong, thanks very much for your comment there. And with that, viewers, we're now going to proceed. Now, U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick is facing growing pressure after seeking to distance himself from the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein amid newly released documents detailing their contact. Millions of files have been made public by the U.S. Justice Department in January that include emails showing Lutnick visited Epstein's private island for lunch years after he had claimed to have cut all the ties. The disclosures have triggered bipartisan calls for his resignation. Testifying at a Senate hearing, Lutnick insisted he had minimal contact with Epstein, saying they exchanged about 10 emails and met only 3 times over 14 years. He said the island lunch was incidental, occurring while he was nearby on a boat with his family. Lawmakers have also questioned contradictions between the documents and Lutnick's earlier statements, including claims that he vowed never to be in a room with Epstein after a 2005 instance. Now, the controversy is coming as scrutiny intensifies over Epstein's connections to powerful figures in politics and business, a day after Associate Ghislaine Maxwell refused to testify before a U.S. House committee. Let's hear it.
Secretary Lutnick, as I said in my opening statement, you led people to believe that you had cut off all contact with Jeffrey Epstein after the 2005 encounter you and your wife had in his apartment. But as I'm sure you know, the Epstein files show a very different record of interaction. Why do the Epstein files show you coordinating a meeting and planning a visit with Jeffrey Epstein on his private island in December 2012?
Thank you for the question. I'm glad to be here to make it clear that I met Jeffrey Epstein when I moved to a house next door to him in New York, right? And I met him then. Over the next 14 years, I met him 2 other times that I can recall, 2 times. And that is none for 6 years. So 6 years later, I met him. And then a year and a half after that, I met him and never again. Probably the total, and you've seen all of these documents, of these millions and millions of documents, there may be 10 emails connecting me with him, probably about 10 emails connecting me with him over a 14-year period. I did not have any relationship with him. I barely had anything to do with that person. Okay?
Did you, in fact, make the visit to Jeffrey Epstein's private island?
I did have lunch with him as I was on a boat going across on a family vacation. My wife was with me, as were my 4 children and nannies. I had another couple they were there as well with their children, and we had lunch on the island. That is true, for an hour, and we left with all of my children, with my nannies and my wife, all together. We were on family vacation. We were not apart. To suggest there was anything untoward about that in 2012, I don't recall why we did it, but
Mr. Secretary, again, as I said, there's not an indication that you yourself engaged in any wrongdoing with Jeffrey Epstein. It's the fact that you believe that you misled the country and the Congress based on your earlier statements.
I looked through the millions of documents for my name, just like everybody else. Yeah. And what I found was there was a document that says that I had a meeting with him in May, I think, for an hour at 5 o'clock.
Okay.
Not dinner or otherwise, for an hour at 5 o'clock.
All right. There's also a reference to the fact that Epstein had expressed an interest in meeting your nanny. Do you know whether Jeffrey Epstein ever met with your nanny?
No, I saw that. I had no idea what that was about.
We are finding in Oregon that at places where we're trying to...
You said casually, well, I looked at my name and how it appeared in them, as does everyone. No, everyone isn't worried about their names being in the Epstein files. I know he was your neighbor. That was a coincidence. But please disclose everything that's relevant here so that we have a chance to work together and move on.
All right, I request Matthew Wadham to join me back in this discussion. He's an American journalist and author. Matthew, thanks very much for continuing to stay with me. Firstly, of course, Lutnick has gone on to testify, but there are many others who are refusing to do that. We were just discussing about Ghislaine Maxwell as well. But even with this testimony, how difficult is it really going to be for authorities to prove either innocence, if that is the case, or really call out their involvement as the proceedings go on?
I can understand why people don't want to testify in Congress about their connection to Jeffrey Epstein, because there is an atmosphere in political circles of mass hysteria right now, or witch trials regarding Jeffrey Epstein. Anybody who had anything to do with him in the past is smeared as a deviant or a criminal, or as a villain of some kind, even if they didn't necessarily do anything untoward. Now, Secretary Lutnick's problem was that he downplayed his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein, and then once the Epstein files were released, 3 million documents so far. Apparently, there's another 3 million to go. I read his description showing a minimal relationship was proven not to be accurate, and so he's in trouble. There's a saying in American politics: "It's not the crime that gets you; it's the cover-up." So he is, in this sense, the author of his own misfortune for downplaying his ties instead of just coming forward in the beginning and saying, yeah, I had a relationship with him of some sort. It was limited, and some of it took place after he was known to be a sex offender. If he'd just come clean with that, the storm would have blown over already, and nobody would be talking about Howard Lutnick and Jeffrey Epstein. But he didn't, so now he's the focus of all this attention. And Bill and Hillary Clinton are supposed to be testifying on Capitol Hill about their connection to Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah.
And we don't know for sure if the Clintons did anything untoward, but I guess we're going to find out.
All right, Matthew, thanks for your comment there. And we now move on, viewers. Now, satellite images are showing that U.S. forces in Qatar's Al Udeid base have mounted Patriot missiles onto mobile truck launchers amid rising tension with Iran. This mobile positioning allows for quicker deployment or repositioning in response to potential Iranian threats. The move comes after US President Donald Trump's warning to bomb Iran over its nuclear program, missile activities, and support for groups in the Middle East. Satellite analysis shows a build-up of military assets across the region, including the deployment of missiles in M983 heavy expanded mobility tactical trucks at Al Udeid. Meanwhile, Iran has restocked its missile inventory with new naval drone carriers seen near Bandar Abbas. All right, let's go across to Matthew once again in this discussion. Matthew, the build-up is evident. US is clearly saying it wants Iran to arrive at a deal, but Iran is also saying it's not going to relent under any threat.
Right. Iran wants to keep enriching uranium so that it can build nuclear bombs. And the United States wants Iran to abandon that practice. And I don't see how the two sides are going to be able to agree on this, fundamental issue. The Iranians view this as an existential issue. If they think that they can't have a nuclear bomb, they argue that they can't defend themselves against Israel, even though, and any other potential external threats. United States doesn't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon because Iran is the leading state sponsor of terrorism worldwide, and it menaces the United States, has rallies regularly where people marchers denounce America as the great Satan and Israel as the little Satan, and I don't see how the two sides are going to see eye to eye, and yet the United States and Iran are negotiating, trying to find some common ground. It looks to me like a waste of time, but I'm pretty cynical about diplomatic efforts to begin with, and maybe I'll be proven wrong, but I don't think that President Trump is suddenly going to pull a rabbit out of a hat, as the expression goes, and get Iran to agree to abandon its nuclear weapons program. It just won't.
All right, Matthew, thanks for your comment there once again. And viewers, we're now going to move on. Now, Democrats in the U.S. Congress pressed President Donald Trump's top immigration officials over the Republican president's crackdown, the first such hearing since 2 U.S. citizens were killed in Minnesota amid mounting opposition to Trump's mass deportation push. The officials of the highest ranking at 3 agencies overseeing immigration enforcement and legal immigration faced repeated criticism from Democrats on the committee after federal immigration officers fatally shot Rennie Good and Alex Pretty in Minneapolis. Trump has escalated his aggressive immigration enforcement push in Minneapolis in January, leading to clashes between masked immigration officers and residents, opposed to broad immigration sweeps that have picked up many people with no criminal record, including families and children. Meanwhile, some leaders have reacted. Let's listen in to what they had to say.
And obviously, we have now seen the deaths of 2 American citizens in Minnesota. This is all unacceptable and preventable. The safety of law enforcement and the communities they serve and protect must always come first. When officials or elected leaders rush to conclusions about law enforcement or their fellow Americans, public trust suffers. There must be complete and impartial investigation. I expect each of our witnesses to keep this committee fully informed as the investigations run their course, and I will ensure this happens. While these investigations are ongoing, officials and elected leaders cannot rush to judgment.
Despite these perils, our officers continue to execute their mission with unwavering resolve, and we are only getting started. ICE remains committed to the fundamental principles that those who illegally enter our country must be held accountable. Since the beginning of the second Trump administration, we have achieved historic results. from January 20th, 2025 through January 20th, 2026, ICE has conducted nearly 379,000 arrests. Among those arrests were more than 7,000 suspected gang members and over 1,400 known as suspected terrorists. The president tasked us with mass deportation, and we are fulfilling that mandate. Thanks to the resources provided by this Congress, we are ramping up detention capabilities and removal flights daily. In the last year alone, we conducted over 475,000 removals.
All right, let's go back to Matthew, who continues to stay with us here. Matthew, even as Democrats are pressing against Trump's hardline push, there is no, turning back on Trump's authorized ICE enforcement. Is there going to be any significant change or even any reaction to Democrats' push?
Well, President Trump has at least softened his stance on immigration enforcement in terms of his rhetoric, but I think that it is still moving forward in places like in trouble spots like Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I think that the Trump administration is sensitive to the bad PR that it's been receiving, the blowback over the two U.S. citizens who were shot by immigration enforcement officers, Renee Good and Alex Preddy. And, Trump recognizes that this is a political problem for him, but he wants to proceed with immigration enforcement. This was his signature campaign promise in 2024, was mass deportations, and it appears that ICE is still committed to that objective, although, in terms of deportations, the Trump administration is lagging behind what even prior presidents had, who weren't so gung-ho on deportation, managed to accomplish, and this is probably because Trump has met unprecedented resistance from judges and from elected officials across the country. They've made it much more difficult for him to, they've made it much more difficult for the federal government to enforce immigration law.
All right, Matthew, unfortunately running short on time. We'll leave it at that for now. Viewers, that's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.